In the Name of Overhead Athletics podcast, where we cover rehabilitation, biomechanics, human movement, and optimizing human performance. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Max Wardell. I'm going to be hosting today. I'm joined today by Darrin Smith. Darrin is actually a professor of athletic training at Concordia University Wisconsin. He also is the director of the Masters of Health Sciences program at Rocky Mountain University. And we're going to be talking today a little bit about the education system, bettering your education as a professional and as a student, and then also some of our thoughts about what we can potentially do in the future to enhance the learning of students and enhance the learning of future professionals. Welcome to the podcast, Darrin.
Thanks for having me, Max. I'm excited to be here.
This is going to be great. Maybe, just to give a little more background on you, you're an athletic trainer originally by trade, and now you've kind of moved into the education sector and you've accomplished your PhD and you have a master's degree in exercise science. So you have a ton of education behind you, and you've been in multiple universities at this point as both an athletic trainer and as an educator. Can you give us some insight on your experience and kind of what led you to that point?
Yeah, sure. So initially, after getting board certified, I took a GA position to get my master's work paid for and done, and realized how much I continued to like to learn. I think maybe it was probably my junior year. I kind of took off in undergrad in terms of I really kind of delve into stuff and really enjoyed it. So it kind of lit the fire at that point, and I wanted to go on, but felt it was really important to be able to, if I was going to teach, I still needed to practice in these settings that I was at. I feel the best instructors are those that are still practicing as well as teaching at the same time, best of both worlds. So yeah, that the teaching kind of came as part of that contract, and I ended up loving it and just kind of stuck with it. And then any future jobs from there on out all had a teaching component to it and an athletic training component.
So I actually went to Concordia in Ann Arbor. And
Okay.
So we actually had a few athletic trainers that also taught classes almost like in an adjunct capacity. And so one of the individuals at the time who was the head of the human performance division was also an athletic trainer. So it seems that Concordia is always picking up the ATCs for education, but maybe you could provide some insight from kind of bridging that gap between being a clinician and working with athletes and working with patients to jumping over maybe the next day, the next hour, now you're in the classroom educating students.
Yeah, it's busy. It is it's a change from just being a full-time practicing athletic trainer, for sure. You're, especially those first few years when you're teaching, you're always prepping, and you don't have a lot of time. A lot of times you're eating lunch as you're walking through the door and things of that nature. But I love it. I think one of the cooler things about what I'm currently doing at Concordia is I work in their day clinic, and as I'm working with these individuals, or my colleagues are working with individuals, if I see, somebody that I can potentially bring into class and use directly in class, and our athletes are usually, I haven't had anyone say no yet, they'll come in and we have a live patient right in front of everyone, and we can determine, what we'd want to do and how things work, if they do work, if they don't work. And the kids get a lot out of it. So I like to kind of be able to bridge that gap. I'm not big on a lot of testing and quizzing type of stuff. I want these kids to be able to apply.
Which is the most important component, because they're going to go out there, and if there's some sort of disconnect between the education or the textbook and what's happening in real life, there's going to be a steep learning curve when people get out of the education system into the real world.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of these kids, or young professionals rather, they've been given the information from the books, but no one has shown them, okay, here's how you take and actually use it. And the books don't do a great job of that either. I teach courses in rehabilitation, Therex, and motor control and biomechanics. And I don't work out of any one book. I work out of multiple books, and I throw journal articles in there and all that, just because there is no one really good source for this stuff. We really need something that takes more a holistic look at a thought process, if you will, as opposed to siloing. Here's what you do for this. Here's what you do for this. Here's what you do for this. And I think that'll get the workforce what they're looking for. And I think that's the number one complaint that I hear as a professor. When I go and talk to my colleagues, I'll say, hey, how are students working out? What are you guys seeing that you don't like? And the top three are usually either, well, they're not quite sure how to communicate, or their skills are very they're mediocre, and bargaining, I think, would be the third one. Just having that the students focus in so much on what they have been given because they have to take a board exam and they got to pass that board exam, and then that board exam becomes the end all be all. And you can have somebody that doesn't. I know athletic trainers that have taken that board exam 3 times and they're brilliant people. They're just not test takers, so that's kind of a bummer on our end, and we can't do a whole lot about that.
Right. So from the education standpoint, I'm sure we could talk all day about maybe how to improve something like a national board exam or like a certification exam to make it something that's actually going to represent the work that's going to be done. But from the education standpoint, what are you doing a little bit differently that's getting your students? Because I've actually had some of your students on LinkedIn. They've connected with me on LinkedIn, and I think I've had actually a couple from Concordia send me messages and stuff like that. And so it's kind of neat. But what are you doing a little bit differently than probably the status quo in terms of getting these students ready for true life and for the real world and dealing with athletes and patients?
Yeah. Well, number one is, like I said, I try to bring in as many live patients as possible. I teach from a standpoint of understanding strategies and understanding options. A traditional rehab class, you'll have a unit on strength, you'll have a unit on power, you'll have a unit on flexibility, blah, 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 and you'll do some basics labs that applies to the body. But the kids don't know how to take that stuff. How am I going to use this? When do I use it? How do I modify it or manipulate it if I have a labral tear in the shoulder? How do I use this type of information to design a better motor control program? So what they end up doing is, I call it monkey see, monkey do rehab, in which they just see somebody doing something and then they just spit it back out without really having a thought process. Okay, we have this diagnosed injury, so how are we going to design a program for that person in this minute? Tomorrow may look different than right now, and what are our goals? So I have it's actually like a 4-page Therex sim that I put them through, and it looks at the capacity of the movement that it is that you want to treat, and it breaks things down into all the component parts. And so you're looking at the amount of time that you have in the session, the healing phase, the goals of the session, what type of treatment you're going to use, how you're going to combine and order the treatments, your arthrokinematics, your osteokinematics, different types of muscle and fascial contractions, how to make things easier, harder, home exercise program. So it really hits everything, but they have to be able to justify everything that they're doing. And I make them actually go and reference. They got to go and look this stuff up in articles. So if you're going to use this, you got to be able to back it up. They hated it at first, but they love them now, and it's they always come back after they're done with the course, and they're like, hey, I can do this with patients now. I don't need to go back and look in the book. And I'm like, that's the whole point right there.
Yeah, and what you said is really important in regards to people actually going back and referencing either scientific literature or case studies or whatever they're referencing. They're going back to something that's had some evidence towards it, that's been studied. Whereas I think a lot of times what we see, and we see this a lot in terms of various types of manual therapy, where there's almost zealots for different types of manual therapy, and you get pigeonholed into one approach, and you may be doing X, Y, and Z over here, and the patient needs these other things over here, and you're never addressing that because, you know, your approach is your approach, but neither of the two approaches has had any substantial amount of literature for this individual patient or for this set of diagnoses. So we kind of end up way over to the one side versus getting over and looking at, okay, what does the research say about what I'm currently doing? And is it any better, different, or the same than what's going on, you know, over there? Because we don't have, especially in rehabilitation, we don't have any consolidated evidence on a lot of these topics.
Yeah, I see. You nailed it. I see quite often somebody goes and gets a new cert, somebody goes and gets needling, and now they're needling everybody that walks through the door, you know, and then they maybe add a modality to it, and then they're done, and they send them out the door, and they don't take the entire process and say, what does this person need? They're looking short term. They don't look for a cause. They're treating a compensation. And like you said, they have blinders on. So it's easy to forget things. And that's where I feel it's important as an educator and someone who still practices to have a process that you go through that isn't what's the word I'm looking for? That isn't created by someone else. You know, it's not dictated by X, Y, and Z type rules. You know, every group has got their own thing. The FMS guys have theirs, and the Gary Gray people have theirs, and it's okay. So just take the best of everything. That's kind of how I look at it. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially in you know, when people are trying to actively learn and develop their own approach, having almost experience with multiple systems, if you will, in terms of assessment and then in terms of intervention is extremely important. And to even branch out further, looking at rehabilitation as a whole, I'm sure you're going to have many of your students that work in schools and work with high school athletes, college athletes, and then some of them are going to work with general population. And I was just having this discussion the other day with an individual, which was the rehabilitation field was made for the general population, which is largely sedentary, largely inactive. And then we're trying to branch it out into athletics, and having the same exact approach for the individuals who are sedentary may not be the best option when dealing with your elite level athletes. And yes, we can scale everything, but it's almost, in my experience, there's almost hey, this is the way it has to be done. These are the ways that you do things. And then you're looking at it, well, these are completely different end goals for these two individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, it just comes back down to the strategy and the paradigm that you decide to work off of. And okay, so healing time may be longer or different. Does the person have a lot of comorbidities that you have to work with? How willing are they to, actually do what you ask them to do? I also, for about 3 hours a week, I'm in a private cash clinic in which I see people, and I tell you, I love working with them. I'm working with people that are anywhere between their early 20s all the way up to people that are in their 40s and 50s, and they listen. They're paying money. They want to be there versus the athletes at the university. It's, Darrin, how much can you decrease my pain? How fast can you get rid of it in the middle of the season? And I still want to lift, and I still want to play 2 hours in practice, and we got a game, and they have no recovery, and it's near impossible to manage things sometimes.
And I want to commend you, because I've seen you on LinkedIn. I've seen you talking to professionals out there. Hey, if you were going to, revamp a education system, a master's degree, if you were going to introduce something new into this program and this program, what would you introduce? What would you improve, and how would you alter it to, I guess, improve the program as a whole, which is not something that I see done out there very often. I don't see many educators out there polling the professionals and trying to get some input on how they can improve their product, because in the end, that's what it is. It's a end product that these people have to come in and they have to be able to get what they need to get out of the program in order to be successful. And that's what the students are expecting. And I know as a student myself, that's what I was always looking for. And so I want to commend you on that. That's awesome.
Well, thanks. I look at it just as, it's basic workforce development. It's done across, I don't know how many other professions, and you want to make the profession better. All right, let's go out and talk to those people that are out there. What are they doing in those settings? Versus having like an athletic training, you have the National Athletic Training Association, then you have your accrediting boards. Everyone's all separate, and everyone's kind of got their own opinion. So it's that's one of the reasons I took the job at Rocky Mountain. Is it's a post-professional program. I'm not confined to have to work with an accrediting agency, and I can take and work with individuals like yourself. I had emailed you, and we'll have to talk about that further at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, all right, what do these students really need to know? Higher ed is ridiculously expensive, and it's been that way for a long time. I'm actually waiting for it to come crashing down at some point. But there's a lot of stuff that is unnecessarily taught or not taught in a fashion in which it's usable. So, who best to ask but those people that are out there, the not only working, but then the employers. What kind of things are the employers? I want these types of people in this setting, so how can you help us prepare those people? And it's funny when you brought that up, I think maybe I got a lot of responses to that. And I think only one or two were just like specific types of certifications. Everything else had to do with interpersonal skills, critical thinking, critical inquiry, all those soft skills that make a person a person. You know as well as I do that you can have somebody that's brilliant and really good at what they do, but if they're not a good communicator and aren't a good fit for your environment, it makes life hard on everyone.
And it's tough with the interpersonal skills. I know a lot of physical therapy schools out there, which is my background. A lot of physical therapy schools do interviews. Others don't do interviews, so they don't have any sort of regulation, or they don't even have any sort of system to monitor what type of person am I getting into the program. And without talking to someone, it's hard to know, and it's hard to develop those things in an educational setting.
Mhm.
because that's not really what school was necessarily designed for. So people coming back with that, that's tough on you.
Yeah, yeah, and it's it's the same for you guys as it is for athletic training. I mean, you only get so many rotations. You're exposed to what you're exposed to, and a lot of the people that succeed, it tends to be more of their natural personality that gets them there. I was when I first started, I was an introvert. I was just very shy. I was that kid that was in the corner. And the more I started working with more people, and when I was getting some results, and for me it was the awkwardness. I'm just like, oh, this is too awkward. I can't work with somebody for 40 minutes and not say anything to them. So that kind of broke me out of my shell. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. Just I think the other thing as well too that was brought up um, is giving them a little bit more background on how the business side of things work and
Absolutely.
what they can expect. There are some kids, some athletic trainers going out to job interviews out here in Milwaukee, and one of the questions they'll typically ask is, "All right, we're a company. How do we make money?" And some people can't answer that because they haven't been prepared for it. They have no idea. All they know is their athletic training skills, and that's it.
Right. Even to take that a little bit further, in terms of school, we don't have in physical therapy, especially we don't have tracks where you can, hey, I'm going to go down the sports rehab track or the orthopedics track or the neuro track. We don't have that. So then you end up studying all of the topics and you don't ever have time for any elective classes or any business classes or public speaking, which becomes extremely important if you want to do any sort of presentation in the field. And it's hard to necessarily address that in a program, especially like an athletic training program, especially like a PT program that has an accreditation board that's going to kind of dictate what you have to study and what you teach in the end, because you're trying to get individuals ready for an examination.
That's it. That's it. And you have such little time and so much information. It's like you're just touching on this, touching on this, touching on this. And I have to constantly tell my students that when we're doing like lab-based stuff, like we were going through joint mobilization last week. I had to say, hey, we're only going to spend one day on this. This is all we got. You can only be exposed to it at this point. If you want to do it more, you got to do it live. You got to do it clinically, but we can't take the time out of class to do it because there's too much to do. We can't miss a day. You got to stay on task. It's that much information.
Which makes it tougher with online learning.
Yeah.
But when you work with individuals in the motor learning, I'm really interested in your motor learning classes. One of the biggest things that I see in working with athletes, working with throwing athletes, we're working on improving the way in which they throw, is when I get somebody who's new, someone that's an intern, maybe somebody that's been observing for a couple weeks, and now we're going to get them into a little bit of application where they're doing a little bit of stuff on their own. One of the things that I notice first and foremost is they always want to fill time with talking, and it's choosing what kind of speech is going to be most effective. So it's always instruction, like over instruction. And we know with a lot of the athletes that we're dealing with and a lot of the new research, we're going to be better off if we kind of keep our mouth shut a little bit and let our drills, let our activities kind of dictate the intensity and dictate how the athlete moves. Is this something you talk about much in your program? Because what I'm seeing with individuals who come to us who've been through some of the places around the areas, that's not something that's addressed, because a lot of the things that are going on motor learning and motor learning education right now are research from the 90s and not really accounting for a lot of the new research and the new information that's been coming out in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So in terms of how I like to kind of go about that, I'll break it down into volitional versus subconscious. So, and we'll always, okay, so what does the person have to, I'll give an example and say, all right, person has to hit a baseball and then they got to go to first base. What are all the things that they're going to think about? You usually have a couple ball players in the class, so they'll answer and they'll give you a couple of different things. Okay, and then I follow it up with, well, what else needs to happen to actually get you there that you're not thinking about? And so we kind of look at it from those two areas. When it comes to designing exercise as well as utilizing and applying the research, it can be tricky just because some of this stuff is outdated. Probably one of the more common types of measurements that they're going to use is a motor evoked potential, an MEP, which is just the overall output leaving your brain after something, after the input has gone in from a vestibular, visual, and somatosensory standpoint. Brain does with it what it wants, and you get a signal going back out, and you get, you know, whatever it is that you're looking to do. You can think about part of that, and then the other part may be automatic. So there's a lot of research that takes that measurement, and they'll look at, all right, what happens to their motor output if we change the tempo? What happens if we use a metronome? What happens if we look at a specific type of muscle contraction? What happens if we're looking at like using cross education or interlimb development? So that's kind of the direction that everything's going right now, but there are so many things that play into motor learning and motor development that we don't have it all figured out, not even close.
Right.
I have a whole worksheet that I give my students that it's got about like 30 or so different ways to manipulate an exercise. So I'll have a person that I bring in, and let's take an easy one here. Let's say they have like a valgus collapse in the knee, right? And we want to train them, but we don't want to have to give them 1,000,001 instructions in words, like you're saying. Let's optimize our time here. So what strategy on this sheet could we use to get the person to do that movement without having to tell them too much or as little as possible to help their body figure it out? And you know, whether you use like a reactive neuromuscular training, whether you add stability to something, whether you change the tempo of something, what if you do something visually or auditorily, you know? So that's the approach that I take. And then from there, I teach the kids, this isn't going to be any good if you don't have a pre-measure and a post-measure. So even all the way down to treatments within a session. If I'm doing something to maybe decrease some neural tension, and I work on a person for 5 minutes, I want to see what I got and what I didn't get and make note of it. Do I need to move on? Do I need to do a little bit more? You know, that kind of thing. So I'm in total agreement with you. I think a lot of what goes on is they're trying to hypothesize everything in their brain. I need to get this to fire. I need them to do this. You got to be in this position over here. And there's so much you can do in so many different positions that you can put a person in that their body will just figure it out on their own, which is one of the best ways of doing things. And then they can focus on something else, you know, and you don't have multitasking going on, and the output just ends up getting better. So unfortunately, I don't see enough people doing that though. You know, I think and I don't know why. It may not be taught. They may not think that way. I'm not sure. I don't have a reason for that.
Well, I think it's more complex to think like that. It requires more thought process. from the practitioner than just, hey, I want you to do this. Okay, change it and do this way, do this way. And the reason I asked you the question in the way that I did is we see that a lot of the research on motor learning is either somebody performing a skill that they've never performed before, or it's in presence of a neurodegenerative pathology or a neurological lesion. And when we're dealing with athletes, which is what I like to talk about because that's what we like to do, but that's what a lot of students will end up doing. Hey, I have an athlete walking the clinic, especially a high intensity athlete where movements occur so quickly. And these same things that worked for the neurological patient may not be the best option when dealing with an athlete. And there's ways to potentially scale it, and some of the things hold true, but sometimes it's a completely different approach. And we're also dealing with individuals who have refined their skill to a certain level, not the individuals who came into the skill. They've never shot a dart or thrown a dart with their left hand, and now they're throwing a dart, and I'm trying to teach them that. That's very different than, say, teaching somebody different gait mechanics when they've been walking for 30 years or 20 years, or they've been sprinting since they were 2 years old or 3 years old, and now I'm trying to alter the sequence of locomotion.
Right. And that's where, alluding back to what you were saying, that's where I think it's important to have an understanding of how much do we need to tell them and what kind of environment can we put them in to get the results that we want to get. And it's that bigger picture, it's that bigger thinking that we have to go back to, as opposed to this one thing is hurt, so let's just stay here and work on this one thing.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it by talking about how you have all of these other options. I have numerous options, probably a near infinite number of options to alter how an athlete moves by giving them different sensory feedback, by giving them different stimulus, putting them in a different environment. I have so many options, one of which is giving them different verbal instruction.
Yep. I've had a lot of solid luck with a lot of visual stuff, eye placement, head placement, vestibular wise. That stuff seems to work really, really well for the head and the neck, regardless of whether they had concussion or not. But yeah, I like to just play around with a lot of different positions. I don't just need an open space. I mean, it's infinite. You don't need a ton of exercises at all. You only need a handful of exercises, and then, all right, I got all these different strategies. Am I going to use this exercise to strengthen, create more endurance, more power, or do I just need to tweak it so it's a motor control exercise just to be able to help us reestablish that so we can get that motor learning, and then they can go on to strengthening or wherever you want them to go.
Right. And when we talk about variability and variability of training, we kind of have almost, it seems from my eyes, two groups, where you have one group who's hyper focused on variability, and you have another group who is very monotonous in their practice. It's repetition. You need 10,000 reps, and you're just going to continue to rep one thing. And we have this other variability group that oftentimes doesn't account for all of the variability that occurs. Internal variability. Hey, when you're getting fatigued, there's variability. You're not the same individual that you were 30 minutes ago. Or, hey, I've added muscle mass in the last 3 months. I now have to establish a new coordinative pattern, and no longer am I training the exact same exercise I did 3 months ago because my apparatus, my actual physiology and structure has slightly changed. So there's a lot of ways that we have variability in practice, and variability can be as much as changing one small thing, or fatiguing one area of the body, or adding one little bit of load, or adding a little bit of time to something, or taking away a little bit of time. I have so many options for variability. Too much variability in the beginning and too many exercises is going to be overwhelming, especially for an athlete who wants something that's fairly concise. Hey, what's my thing? What do I do? I have 5,000 options out there. What are the 10 things that are going to make me better?
Yep. Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think exercise is overprescribed. Um, and you have to take a look at you. So you have this individual coming into you, whether you have 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever you got in from time wise to work with them. You get your updates from them, you do any kind of recheck from your last session with them, and then from there you're off. So for me, I want to know that that person is walking out the door with something that they didn't walk in with. So alluding back to your 10,000 rep thing, how do you know something's working when you're just repping without a measure? And that's I'm gonna throw a little dart at the athletic training world, because we're guilty of this, because a lot of us have been trained to, okay, well, this person has winging scapula, so they got to do these exercises for 6 weeks. So just start doing them and we'll see you in 6 weeks. And then of course the person comes back because it's a 4-way band exercise and that doesn't get you where it needs to be. And they said, I did what you wanted me to do, or T's, I's, and Y's are another one. That kind of stuff. And it's just not that simple. It needs to be specific to that person on that day, on that time. And I'm glad that you brought up fatigue as well too, because I've seen it a lot of times working with the motor control. I'll fatigue them out, and sometimes that ends up just being more of a central fatigue as opposed to an actual metabolic fatigue. And then the athlete's looking at me going, well, Darrin, I can do a whole bunch more. And I'm like, no, you're going to need a couple days to recover from this. Mm-hmm. And I have to kind of explain it to them. I know we don't have a whole big grip on central fatigue, and that's kind of a hot topic at this point, but we do know that it acts like a DOMS and what I've read, 72 hours, it can still be somewhat present. And if you're trying to rebuild a pattern, that's going to make things harder.
Absolutely. You could use it to your advantage, certainly, as well. And that's what I find that I do a lot with athletes is I'm going to introduce either a local fatigue or a systemic fatigue, because I know what's going to happen. And I do it strategically, but I know what's going to happen during the season. This is like an off-season thing. I know they're going to go out there. I know when high school baseball, I was just telling all my guys, high school baseball starting up, you're going to throw probably 3 times as much as you should and 3 times as much as what you need to throw, because they're going to want you to play shortstop, and then you're going to have to pitch, and now you're going to take 200 ground balls at practice and throw across the diamond. No one's ever keeping track of how much these athletes are actually doing. And then they're going and they're swinging on top of it. And they have to have some semblance of technique and technical proficiency, even when there's the presence of global fatigue in the system. So I'll use it strategically in the off season, but when I'm trying to improve an athlete's throw or trying to improve the way that an athlete moves early on, I think athletes, they go to practice, they've taken 200 swings, and now they've come into me and they're wanting to improve their throw. And there is a central fatigue component that I'm trying to say, okay, well, we got to improve the way you throw. We only have a certain amount of time till the season gets here, but we're dealing with, hey, this probably isn't the best learning environment for your system, especially early on when we're trying to teach you a new skill.
Yeah. And then, so then that's where you got to reach into your toolbox and what other strategies do I have to keep this, instead of just active rest, what can we do? Do we need to get them in like a swim X? Do we want to work the other side and get like a cross education type recovery for things? Do we just want to add more stability so that the person can perform the movement better and still maintain form? There's less reps, less sets, less weight. I mean, there's so many different things that you could do. So you don't necessarily, I think a lot of people think they just have to stop, and we need active recovery in there.
Absolutely. If I'm going to pivot a little bit in the discussion here, because I want to ask you, for individuals out there who are looking to pursue further education, maybe they're in their undergraduate degree, maybe there's somebody who's already in the field, but they want to take their skills to the next level. What are a few recommendations you would have in terms of furthering education, whether that's an academic program, whether that's independent study, a course, certification? What do you kind of recommend to those individuals?
You know,
Tough question.
Yeah, because there's so many good options, and university is usually always the first thing that everybody thinks, and it's not for everyone, and it's not just from a financial standpoint, but there are, if you're looking to get another degree, you have to be very careful, and you really need to discuss with the people that teach in that program what the classes are like, how they're set up. You want to know. You just don't want to read the course titles and say, well, this sounds kind of cool, because it may be nothing like what they have written. For someone that isn't looking to invest, an average master's degree program now is going to be between $20,000 and $30,000. And you can do them anywhere between 1.5 and 2 years. You know, I'm seeing, I don't know about you, Max, but I'm seeing all kinds of like fellowships popping up online on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Come work with us for 14 weeks and we'll show you blah, 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 blah. Now that's exactly what you and I were alluding to earlier. The individuals that do those, they're smart enough to take the stuff out of those classes. They know how to use it. They're showing these people how to be successful with it. It's the stuff that should have been taught to begin with.
Right.
So I can't mention any names. I can't think of any names directly offhand here with those. But yeah, I see like one a week at least popping up on LinkedIn. They're all over the place. And I know that's also happening not only for athletic trainers, but a lot of PT schools are doing that too, to where after PTs graduate, they can go and sign up for X amount of credits. They can be a TA, and then they have somebody that mentors them from the university coming to the clinic that they actually physically work for. And it's like having a preceptor right there, but you're at your actual job, and they're just helping you with that transition as well. So that's another option. You know, and then there's obviously your coursework. And, you know, I have mixed feelings about coursework, and they're all good. I would rather go to a workshop sometimes than go to a symposium, you know, just because I want to get a more concentrated dose on whatever it is that I'm learning. But I'm kind of, I always play devil's advocate, because when you go to these things, you know, they like to sell a lot of Kool-Aid, and here's our system, and here's this, and here's that. So you need to have a good understanding kind of what you're getting yourself into. And I don't think I don't think a lot of people look at it that way. I think they just look at it as, oh, I'll be able to cup, or I'll be able to dry needle. And, you know,
even as far as your master's degree, looking at who the faculty is, and then looking at, okay, here's what the degree is, here's what the courses are, but here's who the faculty are. Let's look a little bit into them, and then let's go and talk to some individuals who've been through the program or are in the program currently, and what are they saying, and what are they getting out of it, especially for, like you said, individuals who already are in the field. You know, they're looking to further their education. I mean, if you're looking to just put some letters after your name, I guess that's a different scenario. But
yeah. And when I talk to potential students, the first question I'll ask them is, you know, where do you want to be in 5 years? Why are you getting this degree? And some of them have thought about that, and some of them have not. But it is our responsibility. I take the responsibility in my program to help mentor them and help them take the steps to get to where they want to go, whether that be taking particular classes that maybe we got to switch one out here or there for the individual because it's going to be more specific to a setting or a skill set. Getting them in contact with the right people. Like we have some individuals that wanted to get into the NHL. So we just had somebody graduate this past year that was the assistant athletic trainer for the Maple Leafs. So
Oh, awesome.
we send people over to him. We got a strength coach coming in this fall from the Dodgers. We got an individual coming from the Twins as well too. So it's an understanding of what that can get you, in a good program just won't, you won't walk out of there with a lot of certifications. A lot of people, when they're looking at, I'm going to take a master's, I'm going to get a master's degree, they think, well, I should walk out of there and I should be able to do Graston. I should be able to do blah, 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 you know, and get all these things. Well, when you look at how much you pay for college credits, and it's like $400 a credit, and you're paying all this just to take that in your coursework, it's taking away from your coursework when you could just go and do it on your own for way cheaper. You know what I'm saying? So we put the emphasis at Rocky Mountain on everything's evidence-based, but it's also practice-based as well too. And having that mentoring piece to get you to where you want to be. But the information's practical. We may talk a little about theory here and there, but it's just, you're doing stuff like in the biomechanics class that I teach. Those guys have labs every week. Okay. They have to record themselves doing some stuff. And then we look at it, we break it down, what's good, what's bad. How do we fix things? How do we construct our own correctives, if you will, and that type of thing. So we have been doing online teaching for 23 years now. We're good at it. We got it down. Buyer beware when it comes to master's programs. There's a lot of them out there, and a lot of them are checking the box. So you want to be a smart shopper, and you want to talk to as many people as possible.
Phenomenal advice. And I just want to say, Darrin, I think you're doing something very special. Looking at what you've done in terms of research in the profession and what some of your students have actually said to me, I think you've got something going that's very, very special, and it's going to continue to grow. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you. Thank you very much too. Same to you as well. I'd love to extend that to you. I use a lot of your videos in class. We just got done.
I love to hear it.
Teaching the elbow. So I took a whole bunch of your clips. We took them down and we made a nice little checklist. So these guys know what to look at when someone's throwing in case we got any elbow pain. So thank you and everything that you guys are doing over there. It's awesome. I love your channel.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Like I said, thank you again for coming on. This is awesome. And we'll have to do this again because there's so much we can talk about and so much information that you have that we can get out to people and maybe help some people in furthering their education and maybe help some people in developing educational programs. I'm sure it's going to help me long term too, just hearing from you and hearing from, your experience in developing our education stuff at the OAI.
Yeah. Let me know. Let's keep in touch and let's collaborate here.
Awesome. Well, alrighty. In the name of Overhead Athletics, Max Wardell signing off.